Everyone. Welcome to the first in a new set of Sundowner Sessions. We might feel a little lost at the end of the day. So we named the Sundowner Session under the COVID Gyan initiative. And please go and check out the COVID Gyan website, which has a lot of information about the pandemic. And it's a multi-institutional effort. So we will acknowledge all of our partners. And that includes all the TIFR institutes, as well as IISc and India Bioscience and others. So that was just quickly about COVID Gyan. I'll introduce our three speakers today, as well as our moderator. Mahin Ali Khan is the head of communications at the Bangalore Life Science Cluster, and she's going to be our moderator today. And our three speakers are Sravan Rajnayan, Abhijit Bhaduri, and Karishma Kaushik. Sravan is the head of HR at Signeasy. Abhijit is a personal branding and talent coach and does many things, which you can ask him about, or you can check out his LinkedIn profile for. And Karishma is an assistant professor at the Savitribai Phule Pune University. So Karishma is also a very vocal advocate for mental health in academia. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to Mahin to welcome and start off this discussion on grief in the workplace.
Thanks, Pavitra, and thanks everyone for taking time out on a Thursday evening. And I know that all of us have many things that we would rather be doing than be stuck on yet another Zoom call. But I want to thank you all for really making the time to be here. Some of my friends are in the attendee list as well. So thanks, guys, for showing up. And thank you, Nayan and Abhijit and Karishma, for being part of this conversation. We, as you know, COVID Gyan is this repository of scientific-based, reliable information on the COVID-19 pandemic. And while a lot of focus was on the pandemic itself, and of course, the science behind, the vaccine development and so on and so forth, there was this massive sort of lacuna we felt, and that was in the whole space of wellness, lifestyle, and mental health. And I think for a very long time, mental health and lifestyle, or mental health and well-being rather, have been taboo subjects in Indian workplaces. And I'm happy to know that that has been changing hugely. With the pandemic, when everyone was kind of forced into working from home, that really kind of redefined what work meant for us, how we were going to work, how we were going to balance our work with our home, because now our work is, is in the place that we live as well. So lots of balances were tipped, I think, in one direction or another. And it's made us have to question a lot of things and reevaluate a lot of things. But I think more than anything, we've had to deal with the fact that people that we know and love have been dying around us, right? And people have been losing jobs, right? And people are losing other loved ones. And it really is, I think, beginning to affect the very sort of ground on which we stand. And it's making us sort of question, what is it that we can do, and how is it going to impact our work performance? But it doesn't just end there, because if this isn't working, then you can't be working, right? So I came across this article by Abhijit on Twitter, and it was grief, the ignored emotion in the workplace. And I was like, that is so true. When we go to work, we're all expected to kind of put on this happy face, this positive face. Yes, COVID and people are dying, and my country is like losing millions of people, but that's okay. I'm going to come and give it my best at work every day. And this is not going to happen. And this is what Abhijit addresses in his article. So I just want Abhijit to tell us a little bit about how that started, and then let's get the ball rolling. And I want attendees to know that this is an extremely informal chat. It's not your regular webinar, so I'm not going to kind of like lock you behind a door. We are going to involve you in the conversation at every point, and you will have many opportunities to interact with us, throw tomatoes at us, and essentially tell us what a great job or a crap job that we've been doing and how we can do so much better. So without any further ado, Abhijit, please.
Thank you so much, man. Appreciate your having me here. I think I sort of really looked at the fact that when we talk about the term grief, there's always this tendency to believe that grief is only related to people dying. A loved one dies and you experience grief. That's not true. And in the workplace, for some strange reason, we have always been told that, when you come into work, I mean, I don't want to know what problems you have. I don't want to know about what's going on. All that is for you to manage outside, leave it outside and come into the office. Then there is a time, because of the pandemic, work actually has moved in home. So, it is the workplace which has encroached into our personal space. And yet there is no change in that entire conversation, because I still see most people really, the leaders talk about, this whole thing that, yeah, we've moved in home, but, there is no drop in productivity. I mean, in fact, our productivity is up. A lot of it is because people are working longer hours. I mean, the commute time, without question, the employers have taken that on, saying that it's all right. You were commuting any which way. So now, you've got to give that time to us. In the same way, just being available, accessible online all the time is just really, hurting people. So I think the whole objective of the newsletter, I just thought, since there is a reasonable number of people who read it, I just thought I would talk about the fact that grief is not just, about losing a loved one. Grief is really about any loss of what is familiar and what is reassuring. So, so in that sense, when, let's say, you leave behind a workplace which you're familiar with, a routine that you're familiar with, colleagues that you are familiar with, everything. And there's suddenly this new place, and we are supposed to just continue switching on and just sort of saying that, oh, you're right, that was yesterday, but now today here I am. So I think it was really just about that. So I wanted to draw attention to the fact that there are many things. Just one last point I want to add is, I think grief and grieving is not something we should be ashamed about, because, personally, I believe that grieving is a process of healing, and it allows us to leave the past behind and move on. It can happen because of a heartbreak, and heartbreak is not just with a loved ones. It can be things that you missed out in the workplace. There are so many situations. People were committed, let's say, an increase, they were committed something, and then COVID happened and all that has been frozen. So there is a loss that many people have experienced. And that, I think, was the purpose of telling people there's much more. And it's okay to grieve, because without grieving, you don't heal. And if you don't heal, you can't move on. So that was the whole sort of impact.
Absolutely. What you're saying is very valid. And I think it brings up two things, to my mind at least. One is, you're right, it's absolutely normal, it's human to grieve. And for some reason, we've kind of been, I wouldn't say brainwashed, but we've kind of been programmed to think that, no, those are emotions that you don't bring into a workplace. Well, I mean, you've brought your workplace into your house. So, I mean,
Yeah.
it's just like it's water all over, isn't it? I mean, it's work is at home, home is work. And therefore, the emotions that you didn't bring into the workplace are now emotions that you have to bring into the workplace, because, hey, you brought your workplace to your place of residence, right? So that's definitely, I think, a point that we should take into consideration. Also, the point about, that it's not something to be ashamed of. And I think you're right. And I think, as maybe, and I'm wrong, if I'm wrong, anybody in the audience and any of our panelists can please correct me. But I think as Indians also, like, we have this thing, like we have this ideal that we have to live up to, And it's like, yes, we're very emotional people. In Bollywood, we're very emotional, and we're very emotional otherwise, and we react very emotionally to politics and stuff that happens in science and everything, touche. But we're also, expected to kind of toe the line, and we're very good at towing the line, I think, as well. So I'm going to ask you, Nan, what's it been like for you? Like, what's the temperature like where you work? How's that been working out for you?
Yeah, I think good points by Abhijit, and this has been an ignored emotion, not just at the workplace, but even at homes, right? If I remember a few years back when I lost a pet, one of my uncles told me that it's okay, you will be fine. But I was like, no, this pet was not yours. She was mine, and I know the grief. And like Abhijit said, this is a process. This is not a phase that you will just forget after 3 months or 4 months, and then tada, I'm all right. Now I'll get a new pet. It doesn't work like that. And as a first-hand practitioner of workplace practices or HR best practices during grief or implementing the right mental health programs, I did see a lot of grief and grief-related situations in the past 1 year, probably more than what I've seen the last 10 years of my experience, right? Now, the entire definition of grief, like Abhijit mentioned, it cannot just be about a loss of, loss of your family member. Even for a colleague, if I'm losing a colleague, what about the friends that you made at office? What are they feeling like? And especially in this current scenario, I don't have the bandwidth to kind of travel, offer my condolences, be patient with them, and ask them to come back to work and start their work and be productive from day one. It is a long process, and it could even be longer than what it was perceived before. Uh, Grief for the longest period in workplaces has been only about losing a family member. Oh, you lost your so and so in the family. Okay, take 15 days leave, 20 days leave, feel better and come back.
Where do you work that gives you 15, 20 days leave to grieve a family member? I want to work there. First of all,
We do.
I
We
mean,
do.
that's amazing because nobody gives you 15, 20 days to grieve a family member.
Yeah, it's a
work.
weekend
let's
and
be
you're
really
back.
frank. Let's be really frank. That's
It never was like that, Mahin. Even
Sure.
organizations, they
Yeah.
were giving a 4 to 5 days of bereavement leave. That was the
Yeah.
policy. But more and more organizations across the globe need to restructure their policies around grief. Grief education is something that you don't have at workplaces. You have a POSH policy, you have a
But
work
Nayan,
from home
you're
policy.
saying things I've never heard before. Bereavement policy, grief. What is it?
Grief education. There is no grief education.
I'm going to go over to Karishma now. And Karishma,
Yeah.
you work in academia, and have you ever heard any of this stuff? This is not known to us.
Not in the formal sense, we don't have academia doesn't label things as well as corporate does. Maybe I can say it that way. But one thing I'll
Very
take from where
diplomatically put.
Pardon,
Very
Mahin?
diplomatically put.
Yeah,
Yes.
but I'm taking on from what Abhijit said, where grief is not just loss, it's transition, it's change. Looking back, when I moved to India in 2018, I shifted continents after a decade in the US, and it was also a brand new role. Looking back, I was probably experiencing grief at the workplace. It was a combination of anxiety, stress, losing something very familiar, change, suddenly new environment, new structure to work with. And I think two things that really came out is it did cause extreme anxiety, and I felt cornered because suddenly you're dealing with things like administrative hassles, interpersonal equations at work, getting the science moving. And there was no immediate work-related ombudsperson that I could approach. So the two things that worked for me was speaking about it closely to people in my team, saying that, what's your perspective on this? Am I reading this right? Because for a long time, I questioned whether I was even reading the situation right.
Right.
Was I being oversensitive? Was I not reading it at all? And the second thing I think which I would recommend is in such situations is seeking professional help.
Yeah. Yeah.
We may not call it grief, but it's certainly anxiety, it's certainly stress, it's something that keeps you up at night. It's the first thing you think of in the morning when you get up. That how is this person going to behave with me? Yeah. How am I going to navigate this situation I've never navigated before?
Absolutely. There are so many interesting things that are coming up in this conversation. I think, when you think of grief in the context of the pandemic, your immediate thought is, well, death, right? And the loss of someone. But what this conversation is throwing up is like, no, there are so many layers to grief. And grief is such an incredibly personal experience. And as Abhijit said, and I think he's bang on, it's a lot to do with change as well. Because, well, the pandemic has meant change for us at many levels. And the loss of something has also meant change for us, right? So we are dealing with grief, I think, at multiple levels simultaneously, right? Are we in agreement with that, or am I just...
Yeah, mine. I just wanted to add one thing here. And grief also occurs when socially we are not expected to talk about it. I mean, and I can so totally relate to that. When people who have worked outside of India come into India, Indian origin, there is absolutely zero sympathy that it's a change, because people say, so what's the big deal? So when I experienced the thing myself, when I came back, having been outside for a long time, and then when I come back, zero sympathy. I mean, what's the big deal about it? So, and in fact, if anything at all, people sort of smirk about it when you say that, okay, these are things that I worry about. So I think when you are not able to express that, that is another trigger for the grief. You should be able to express it in a safe, psychologically safe area.
Yes.
Could be with a colleague, could be with a friend, could be with family, whatever works for you. And then, if necessary, if that's beyond what you can handle, then you seek professional help. But step one is the psychological safety of being able to acknowledge it and say, it's okay to feel this way, so there's nothing wrong with me because I'm feeling like this. So I think that's the part which I related most to that conversation.
That's a fantastic point, and you're right. And I think that also I need to add that I've seen in my own personal experience that grief has many faces, right? It's not just sitting in the corner and weeping. It could be going completely numb. It could be having no expression at all. It could be displaying emotions or displaying behavior that you just have not been familiar with. It could mean yelling and screaming, all kinds. And the things I have experienced these things, with friends and colleagues over the last 1.5 years, and it has been largely inexplicable. The grief also, I think, comes at least for someone like me personally, has come from a sense of, I think, isolation. That has been a very big part of, or a byproduct of the whole pandemic. And the sense of, I'm not really in touch with people that I know very well. I can't see them. I kind of feel closed up where I live. So that in itself is a kind of grieving, because I personally have felt like, I'm losing the best years of my life.
Yeah.
I'm never going to have the kind, not that I have great energy, but I'm never going to have the energy that I have right now again. And I'm losing it, and so I think even that sense of loss has really played into, at least into my psyche. So at this point in time, we have a question, and I'm going to, it's an anonymous question. So I'm going to read it out. If anyone would like to take it, please take it. And I'm also going to open up the floor to anyone else who would like to add a comment or to ask anyone here a question or just be part of the conversation, right? So attendees, if anyone wants to be part of it, please just raise your hand or let Pavitra know and we let you on. So the question is, would the speakers like to talk about boundaries? I think as Indians, the concept of work-life boundaries rarely exists. I think that's a great point. So who would like to take that?
I'll have a go, and then so I think when in the pre-pandemic place, work-life boundary was defined by physical location and time. So
Right.
there were two variables that where you work and when is work. That was very clearly marked, and there was one rule that worked for everybody. So office starts at 9, ends at 5. So then that's work for you, and anything else that you do is in that gray zone. So
Right.
So that was how it was defined. But now in the scenario where we are living in, both things have changed. Some people are working from home, some are working from their hometown, some are working from a third location. And those situations are very different. Also, I think what has happened is the time boundary has completely got blurred.
Right.
When you don't have those clear markers, it's hard for the body to understand when you should start work and when you should finish work. Both are extremely important. Blurring that boundary actually is also something that causes emotion and confusion and anxiety and burnout. A lot of it happens because those boundaries are not clearly marked. I mean, for example, commuting time is a way to mentally prepare that, okay, I'm driving into work. And when you commute back, you say, I'm going back home and I'm done. Which in an agricultural system was marked by sun up and sundown. You call it the Sundowner Session. But it is this gray zone that really is when you are neither here nor there. That's when you experience grief.
I just feel like applauding you right now because somebody has finally understood why we call it the Sundowner Session. Because I get all kinds of weird questions and is it because you serve cocktails at this hour? Yes, this is exactly right.
We wish.
Seasonal, yes, I know. Seasonal, I still owe you a beer. Seasonal affective disorder, right? This is what you're talking about. Absolutely. Sorry, please, Abhijit. I was just so excited. Go on.
No, it's just that, so the importance of having clear markers, just setting boundaries is one of the ways that at least I found it useful to cope. So even now, when I'm working from home, I actually will get up in the morning, have a shower and prepare mentally to work pretty much not different from what I used to do. In the evening, again, when I change my clothes actually, and then go back to, informal clothes, not because there's anybody coming to sort of watch me here, but the fact that you can actually tell your brain that this is over and done. So finding clear boundaries is a very important way to maintain mental health.
I think I have a slightly different take here in terms of boundaries, right? Like, it's a great approach. You have time boundaries and constraints around time. But I think when somebody is going through grief, there's a boundary that we're talking about from a empathetic viewpoint. How much can this person pour out? How much can I go beyond my comfort zones to offer my help? Beyond a certain point, beyond 1 or 2 days, is this person still wanting me to come and kind of give them a hug or probably make lunch or dinner for them? Is that the boundary that we're also talking about? Yes, that also is a boundary. Will that person be okay if I continuously comfort about their grief? They would say, no, I don't want your presence right now. And like, I think Abhijit mentioned about the psychological protection, right? None of us, including me or anybody in this room, can say with conviction that we've spoken about this protection and gone to a therapist and seeked help in the past. But in the current scenario, I have seen a lot of people come to the HR teams or the workplace professionals, and the HR team is becoming or doubling up as counselors or therapists, despite having their own set of problems at homes, right? So for me, boundaries is also that emotional and empathetic boundary that we need to consider. How much can you go beyond your comfort zones to offer somebody help? But I could be wrong in thinking about the empathetic approach.
I mean, it's interesting because I think where you come from, Nayan, is probably a far more permissive work environment. So you can probably go that distance. From the experience that I have had, at least in academic circles, it's pretty much the stiff upper lip kind of way to deal with things. I'm going to let Karishma weigh in here, and then we have a question that we're going to take. Go ahead, Karishma.
I think I would put it this way. Can we set boundaries? I think that was a really good question. Can we set boundaries to avoid or minimize or mitigate grief? And I see a lot of young people on the platform. So I'll say I've had to work my way through this. A classic example was today, right? A collaborator says, can we do this? Can we do WhatsApp? And I said, no, work email is email. Our work exchange is over email. I don't want to get up at 6 o'clock in the morning and having you ask me update on the collaboration. No, I'm not on WhatsApp. WhatsApp is for my family. And it's taken me 3 years to get to this place to say that I choose who I want to have on WhatsApp. They may be friends, families, or people who I really want there. Not a collaborator asking me for updates. It's taken me a lot of courage. It's taken me a lot of time to get here. And I can understand for young people how that might be challenging, but it's possible, and it has helped mitigate grief in the sense that I don't want that onslaught the first thing I wake up in the morning.
Yeah,
right. It's my time.
So no, go ahead. It's your time.
It's my time to say I'm checking my email, and now I'm going to be prepared for what's to come.
Right. Yeah. No. Absolutely. So here's a question that I often have. Right. There's a lot of guilt association with working from home. I think it's because, you kind of stumble out of bed, and you stumble into the bathroom, and then you stumble into your desk, and then you open your laptop and you sit, right? And because you're not really, going through the whole rigmarole of, I have to have a shower, I have to get into my car, I have to drive to work, and then I got to clock in, and so because of that structure is taken away from you, and because it's kind of easy, because you just kind of, you're just coasting with it. For me, at least, there's been this thing of, I feel guilty. So if I get a call at 9:30, I'm going to take it because I feel so guilty. Have I worked enough today? Have I done enough today? Because I can be in the office and do like a fraction of what I do in the house when I'm working at home, but still feel guilty like crazy as a result of that. No, so then I don't know how to deal with that grief. But also, it's not grief. I'm sorry. I don't know how to deal with that guilt, because that really bothers me. So
especially after a prolonged absence, right? Like if you're going through
exactly
a situation of grief.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I just feel like, oh my God. So if I get a call at 9:30 and says, hey, Mahin, I need to do this, to be fair, nobody where I work ever expects that of me. But if somebody says, listen, this is urgent and we need this right now, I'd be like, hey, yeah, I'm going to do it for you. But if I had been going to the office and clocking in my whatever 8 hours a day, I'd be like, sorry, no, I can't do it. I'll give it to you tomorrow. But I don't feel like I have that anymore. So in a sense, a lot of going back to what Abhijit was saying about change, I feel a lot of my life is no longer mine. And I'm answerable for a lot of my time now. And as a result of that, I feel like I don't have control, as much control as I used to have. Right. And now my weekends are also like, hey, you have to attend this webinar, and da, da, da. And I just don't feel like I can say no. So, and I think a lot of other people have that as well. So we have 3 questions and they're all very interesting. So the first question is by Anukriti Arora. And she says, do you think organizations will be able to take the sensitivity towards grief beyond the phase of the pandemic? Which is a very good question.
Yes, I think it is a yes.
I think you work in paradise, so.
No, so I think I do work with a few founders and senior leadership folks across the HR fraternity, right? And the shift in their thinking about workplace safety for employees, or reforming their existing policies, it has changed in consideration with what it was in 2020 and 2021. I wouldn't say paradigm shifts, but
Right.
things have changed a lot. For example, in my organization, we had a 4-day bereavement policy, the standard, but now we have a 30-day policy for anybody who's grieving. We don't know if 30 days is enough, but what we're saying is it is okay. And grief is a common thing that is happening around the world, and it is okay for us to make these reforms, which probably will benefit and safeguard the psychological protection of our employees. But
That's incredible. It's incredibly sensitive and I think so empathetic at a time when it's so necessary.
Yeah.
What about you, Abhijit? What do you think? Do you think that organizations will be able to learn from this?
So, I think one of the big things that I would sort of really frame it as that we need to really rework and renegotiate all our contracts with the workplace, whatever that might be, and even though it looks like the same workplace, because we are going back and working with the same colleagues, etc. But this is really not the same workplace. Nothing is the same. So I think it is important to be able to rethink of this as if, we are getting into a workplace and we are just saying, so what are the work timings? So when am I supposed to be doing this? So what are your vacation policies? Now, if you don't do that, if you don't sort of reframe it in the context of today, I think we are going to be unfair to people, both sides. I mean, employer and employee. We are assuming that the employer is absolutely fine. The employers are also dealing with their own sort of, challenges and insecurities and all of that. So I think it's important for both people to sit down. Both are grieving. It's important for both to sit down and sort of say what is right. I mean, to the point that Nayan made, that, in this 30-day thing, maybe somebody is okay to come back after 10 days. In somebody's case, they might be okay to come back with taking another extra 15 days. So I just think that, being able to have those conversations is a very important step. So that's how I would look at it.
Yeah.
I have a funny anecdote that I'd like to share from my younger days. This is a funny story where probably
days.
3 years down.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, but yeah, I mean, let me share this story before I forget it. So I used to be part of this recruitment team, right? And we would call people for interviews. Out of 10 interviews, let's say we schedule, 3 people would back off saying that, hey, I'm not feeling well today. I met with an accident. That was a common request to reschedule interviews. Somebody would say, I have grief at my home. Somebody died. So I would go back to my other recruiters and be like, this person has canceled the interview. He must be definitely lying. But as on today, in today's scenario, if somebody calls me and says, I can't do this interview today with your management team because I have somebody at home and they need my attention. You see, the moment I get a call like this, I would immediately shift my thought process and I empathize with that person. I say, hey, look, take your time, come back, we'll wait for you. And whenever you're ready, we'll do the interview. So you see the difference of pre-COVID and after COVID. So this is what I'm talking about. There has been a considerable amount of shift of thought process, not just in the HR teams, but also the founders across the globe and employers across the globe. And I'm glad that people are talking about it.
Yeah, I mean, people reporting into people, were always sort of killing off their relatives. And I remember very clearly this one person who killed off her grandmother successfully twice. Um, and except now, when they try to kill off their grandparents, you're just going to have to trust your people. That's the times that we live in. All right. So somebody completely agrees with you, Karishma, and says that I absolutely hate people using WhatsApp for work communication. Damn it, damn it. My question in the line is, people use WhatsApp because it's the most convenient and relatively most accessible messaging app for more people. I feel sometimes no WhatsApp is seen as a classist thing. Really interesting. How do you deal with that?
Tough question, and I haven't been super successful. There are work groups that I do have, which I don't feel I have negotiating power to get out of.
Right.
But where I do, I started speaking about it, and it's not being viewed as classist if I simply say, I prefer this to be over email. Because another reason people use WhatsApp is they want to keep pinging you, to keep reminding you to do something. They don't give you time to think of a response that you want to frame.
Yeah.
Right?
Also, WhatsApp tends to be pretty invasive.
Extraordinarily.
Really
And you have 20 exchanges that could have been one email, and one email that you could have thought and written.
And a meeting that could have been one email. We all know those.
As well.
I wish it was that easy. It isn't that easy.
But you can at least start by saying, for absolutely no people say, let's do this over email.
Yeah.
I think whether choice of the platform actually varies depending on the nature of the work. In some places, I also know one of the largest media companies in the world where, they do all their conversations on WhatsApp, and they document the final decision on email, because there's a major shift in terms of who uses email versus who uses WhatsApp. Many of the younger people in the workforce, the Gen Z, millennials, etc., most of them prefer to use WhatsApp, and then the documentation is on email. So that's just a shifting pattern in communication, that one sees across.
Right. Yeah. So at this point,
but that also means you're constantly turned on if it's on your bedside.
I just heard turned on and bedside, which is not.
No.
I heard that too.
All right.
Yeah, even I got that.
So I've infused some humor into the occasion, man.
There you go.
No, what I meant is, if you do that, if you do it on WhatsApp, then you're constantly turned on when it comes to your work. Your work is on your bedside. Your work is on your dining table. Your work is when you're having a conversation with your grandmom. So it is extraordinarily invasive. And I agree with that. And it's not something I would encourage if I had an option.
Okay. So I personally don't agree with Karishma, because I use WhatsApp to do a lot of my work and communicate with the different teams across the campus. So
Mahin, you should try our workplace. We have a lot of apps excluding WhatsApp. We have Slack.
You can talk to me about giving me a job later, Lynn.
No, talking about invasiveness and how noisy your phones and laptops can get.
I don't want a job from you people. Thank you. I'm going to throw this open now. I really would like people from our fast shrinking audience, which is quite an unhappy situation. But I really would like to open it up to people in the audience. If anybody would like to say something, have a comment to make, or would like to engage with any of our speakers, please, let me know. And okay, Nadia, yes. Go ahead, Nadia.
Yeah, first of all, hi, Mahin, hi. First of all, I can't see anybody. That's my first complaint.
You can't
I can't see anybody.
We're so pretty,
I can only
don't know.
I can't see anyone. I only see a blank screen. First sort out my technical glitches.
We can't see you either.
Nadia. We're very sorry about the grief that you're facing at your at not being able to see us. But go ahead.
अच्छा क्या करूं क्या पहले ये बताओ.
कुछ नहीं बात करो. What were you going to say to us? Or did you have a question?
Well, I was going to. I'm coming from across the border, so I'm talking about grief. You're talking about grief at the workplace, and yeah, I can see everybody now. Hi, this is Nadia. So I'm thinking in terms of the place where I work at, which is therapy, and I have clients coming in who actually talk about what you're talking about. That we are already dealing with so much in life, and then we don't have privacy. And so this is a recurrent thing that's coming up. I think what the pandemic has done is it's brought us into more self-awareness. It's just gotten us in touch with ourselves. Before that, before the pandemic, we were just very robotic about everything. We were putting ourselves and our needs aside till we could get to a retreat or go for a holiday or go to a spa or something. But the pandemic, I think, has just opened up more channels to be more aware of our own needs. So when Krishma talks about WhatsApp, or Sravan talks about the other apps being open, this is again setting your boundaries. We talk about that a lot in my field, which is just setting your own boundaries. It works differently for different people. So if you are comfortable with WhatsApping Mahin, for example, with WhatsApping your work from from the comfort zone of your, say, bedroom, and if it works well, then it works well. That's your boundary, which means that your boundaries are fluid. You can move them around as and when you feel wholesome. So I think the bottom line is how you feel about yourself in that given moment. If you feel you're overwhelmed, that means that you have grief you're carrying. So just being aware of that, I think, just makes us more doable in the pandemic. And I think this is going to go on post-pandemic. When we were doing these sessions last year, I remember, Mahin, we were talking about what life is going to be post-pandemic. I think this is life post-pandemic.
Yeah, but I don't know if back then we anticipated
We
this.
did.
And no, the thing is that the grief that we're talking about, and this is something that again, I will only speak from experience. I don't think it's just the immediate knee-jerk reaction to what's happened, change or loss or whatever. I think it's just this heaviness that we carry around with us, just knowing that we really have been at some point at the epicenter of huge loss, right? Whether it's our friends or family, whether it's our entire health system collapsing, whether it's the certain apathy of government or whatever we want to call it. I think that there has been a collective grief, hasn't there? And it's not just about, oh, I can't go out and party with my friends. It's not about that, but it's about much more than that. And I think that grief also is something that we need to address. We're not at our best at this point in time, and I think
Not.
and I think to kind of expect that kind of performance at the workplace is probably not very realistic at this point in time. Would you say that's true, Nan, as well?
It is. Nadia talked about having no privacy at all, right? And how is that affecting your productivity? And are we talking about privacy at all? Somebody might have lost somebody in their families, but there are surrounding things, or people surrounded around them. There's work calls. There's so much noise from Slack, WhatsApp. Where to focus my energy? Should I grieve, or should I just immerse myself into work? Because a lot of people will come to you and tell you that, hey, it's okay if you're grieving, the best way is to just keep working. And that's wrong at many levels to even suggest that just immerse yourself into work, right? So I had a solution. I had a similar situation where somebody came up to me and they said, hey, I'm grieving and I don't have any privacy at home. What do I do? So I said, you speak with your family members. If you have a small home and if you do not have the luxury to step out, which we shouldn't, keeping safety in mind, speak with your family members. Make them realize that you need your own space. And if you're taking a call or something, they should intuitively see that you're taking a call and they should step back and go back into their rooms, or ask you to politely go to some other room, to a place where you can have your own privacy. But it's easier said than done. Everybody's situation is different. Somebody lives in 1 BHK, somebody lives in bungalows. So each to his own. And I think this will evolve. The education around grief and privacy during COVID scenario will evolve in the next few months, 2 years. And I'm hoping that there is an end to it by the end of this year.
Yeah. So again, I need to read out some questions here. But there was something that I wanted to talk about, which of course I can't remember, so that's not helpful. But let's just read the question then. So Mr. Abhijit said that it's very important, Mr. Abhijit, that we express to overcome grief and also anxiety, which is true. You did say that. But is there any other way to overcome grief and anxiety without expressing it to someone? I mean, in a situation where, for instance, I have no one to express it to. I hope if you're still here, anonymous
Yeah.
attendee, I hope that you talk to us and express to us what it is that you're feeling, because we're here to talk about this. But yeah, what do you do, Abhijit, when
So I think one of the most, sort of private ways to heal is to actually write down about the grief that you feel. One of the ways people do it is to be able to just write a letter to yourself, or letter to the person that you're grieving for. Sometimes it's a relationship, sometimes it's a situation. So describing that in many ways, is a way to deal with it. And there are multiple ways in which everyone responds to a different way of healing. Sometimes reading about it, in somebody else's work is healing. Sometimes listening to music or meditation is healing. There are multiple ways to do it. So you don't have to talk to somebody, until you are comfortable doing it. And then there are helplines which you can use, which you can, connect to people and talk about it. These are anonymous, and these are ways in which you can sort of do that. But as I said, you can also just talk to yourself and do that.
I would also like Nadia to kind of weigh in on this question, because she's a counselor, she's an experienced counselor. So Nadia, what would you say to somebody who says that they don't really, have someone to talk to? What does one do then with what one is feeling? Nadia, are you there? Okay.
She's on
Yes,
mute.
I'm here. You put me on mute, Mahin. So you need to unmute me. Okay. What I'm hearing is, can you hear me, everybody?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you see me?
No, we
not
can't
yet.
see you.
Still can't see me.
No.
It's up to Mahin to do that. I
It's
have
not
no
up to
idea.
me. I'm just hosting.
Yes, it is. You're the host. You have to put everything
Just
on
answer the
for me.
question, Nadia.
Well, okay. What I'm hearing is that grief is something that we need to get done with. Tough. That it's something that we go through, and then we need to get over it because we have work to do. Whereas what I'd like to open the window to is the opportunity to grieve as long as you need to grieve, which means that it's a process that can go on hold while you work, if you feel you are able to work, if you have lost somebody close to you. And every family is losing loved ones near and far due to the pandemic. वैसे भी we were losing people near and far, but pandemic has really done us in. So you grieve till you need to grieve, and then you take pauses and you go back to work. That grief doesn't have to be something which is from A and then you get to point Z and you're done with and you move on. It can take years. You could be taking months, you could be taking weeks, and like Sravan said and Abhijit said, you could be writing notes to yourself, you could be journal writing yourself, you could be listening to a song. Sometimes on a very, very low day, when I've heard some of the stuff that comes to the therapy room, I usually go back to old Bollywood songs and some of the old ghazals, and I pep myself up, and I'm grieving. In that moment also, I'm crying sometimes. So first of all, I don't want to propagate the idea that grief is something that you get over. You can be grieving for years. It's like remembering your lost ones every year on their death anniversary. And so that's grief. That doesn't mean that we've gotten over them. It's just that we've gotten better to remembering them in a different manner.
I think that was a fantastic explanation. I'm so grateful for that, because you're right. You can grieve and still kind of move on and find ways to cope. That was brilliant. And I hope the person who asked the question is still here with us and heard what Nadia had to say, because I think it was such a beautifully put, articulate way of dealing with this. Thank you so much, Nadia. So we have Amrita Tripathi, who has a couple of things to say and a couple of things to ask. So go ahead, Amrita.
Thanks, Mahin. Hi, everyone. So with regards to the WhatsApp discussion, I'm sorry I joined a bit late. I kind of actually always felt that WhatsApp is very intrusive, and it just disturbs your your personal space to a lot extent. So I always have been, using two numbers as a thumb rule. But ever since COVID started, and I work with InSTEM, and luckily people here on Bliss campus are very nice. They don't, really bombard messages on WhatsApp. So I have been using WhatsApp, and I do understand, and I personally prefer my boundaries not to be stepped. So I also, make sure that, others' boundaries are not stepped. So WhatsApp in this current scenario has been extremely helpful. And I personally make sure that, I have my detox time, and I have a cap, like after this particular time I am not going to, see any gadgets, not the laptop, not WhatsApp, not my phone or anything. And that's like my me time, because I really need to then, rejuvenate myself for the next day. So that's my point of view for the discussion. So people who are using WhatsApp for office purposes, in current time or in past, I mean, they need to have that kind of regulation at their own end. And to Nadia, I think this question is directed when she was talking about grief. So, I mean, how does one explain to workmates at workplace about the various stages of grief in general, and as a person who is grieving, knowing there are 7 stages of grief, and at times, you yourself are unable to identify you are in which stage of grief. So it sometimes really comes out as a boomerang, like, there is anger, there are those all 7 stages. So many times people don't really understand. So how do you put it to people around you? Because most of the time people aren't actually empathetic. I feel they are more of sympathetic towards the situation or the loss. But when it comes to empathy aspect, I find many times it's missing.
So we're going to have to get Nadia back, because I think this question was directed at Nadia. So we will get her back to talk. But in the interim, Amrita, I'm just going to put you on hold for a bit. And in the interim, we're going to answer Sunita's question. Sunita's asked a question. Yes, or I think she made a comment. Yes, the heaviness of being, it's an effort to be cheerful, the underlying anxiety. This is really important I think, for you to know, Lan, right? Because people are carrying this baggage, right? This invisible baggage, right? And trying to deal with it without going off the rail. You feel numb and it manifests in the anxiety, body aches, digestive problems, constipation. I think all of that is true. I've actually spoken to people who've had, physical manifestations of anxiety and the grief that they've been experiencing. So thanks very much for that, Sunita, for sharing that with us. That's true. We all agree with that. And we identify with that. So Nadia is back. Nadia, and Amrita had a question for you. I hope you got the question.
Yeah, I did. I heard Amrita's question.
Great.
And I'm glad that she knows that there are 7 stages of grief, and we are during the pandemic, and even in the ordinary life, we don't have time to really process all of that's going on. Sometimes all of the 7 stages, precisely being shock, denial, anger, bargaining, depression, testing, and acceptance. These are actually happening at the same time. You really are not aware of what's happening with you. You're going through it. It's like a wave you're riding. And if you are going through grief at workplace or at home, and you know that it's just getting too much, there's a thing that's called mind-body consciousness. It's become very popular, but I think I just put it as, because we are closer to the Asian side, both in India and Pakistan. On our side, we would call it Sufism or spirituality. On your side, it's meditation, yoga. So you're very, very aware of, when Amrita was talking about this, you're very aware of what you feel in your gut. The West, unfortunately, is still, they're just getting a hang of it. So we have that, we have a start, we are kind of ahead of them. If you have a gut feeling that you're not feeling okay, like mine, you said you could be constipated, you could be running a fever, anything that says you're not feeling okay means that you're not okay. Take a step back, breathe. 4 in, 5 pause, 6 out. Breathe. If you're at workplace, just breathe. 4 in, 5 pause, 6 out. Just breathe and be aware of what you're doing, just breathing. If somebody at work sees that and asks you, how are you? Tell them, I think I'm not okay. I'm overwhelmed. That need to prove I think a part of what the pandemic has done is it has lifted that need to prove. It's opened some of the very, very strong gates and barriers and walls that were there between us and the workplace in terms of grieving or in terms of feeling low or down or just not in sync with ourselves. It's just opened that. It's become a floodgate. Everybody is open to the idea of you not feeling up to it. So if you are not up to it, then you tell the other person that you're not up to it. Take a day off, take a few hours off, take a week off. Nothing will stop. जिन लोगों ने नौकरियां लूज करनी थी पेंडेमिक में, बिजनेसेस लूज करने थे, वो हो गया. We've gone through the worst.
Not everybody.
And people have lost. Yeah, mine mostly. I'm talking about us, the average people, working class, and all. We've lost a lot. We've lost work. We've lost our family, friends. I'm sorry.
I said no. I said language. We have to speak in English.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, my bad. We've lost work. We've lost businesses. We've lost our loved ones. What more could go? And that what remains is just your own health.
Answer that question. Also had a lot to deal with, but no, I think thanks so much, Nadia, for that. You've given us a few tools I think that we could use. We are kind of coming to the close of this, so I really need to do a little bit of wrapping up. This is a really important. I'd like to take this anonymously. Somebody has asked, people who take time out or quit their job to heal are seen in a bad light. How do you deal with the negative reaction from colleagues, family, and friends? I would like Abhijit to answer this. In fact, I'd like everyone to kind of weigh in because it's different, I think, for all of you.
So I think, first is what does it mean to you individually? That's probably way more important than what others think about it. One of the ways to sort of look at it is, when you are genuinely unwell, somebody else might believe that you are shirking. But that's okay, as long as you know that you actually need that time to heal, you should take it. So there is no stigma around that. I also think that, what has happened is because of the pandemic, this whole business of taking breaks has become less stigmatized because people are taking breaks for multiple reasons. It's because, somebody's been laid off, somebody is had to go through a different situation at home. Somebody can't come to work because, there is a problem to leave the kid behind at home, or caregiving at home demands that you stay back and not come back to office as the offices are opening up. There's a range of situations. So I think the stigma that used to be there in the past has come down and is going to come down substantially. I also think that many of those things like, qualification, breaks in resume, etc., all that is a little bit of a thing of the past. So I think that's a good thing to happen. So that's how I would look at it very positively.
Yeah, I would agree with you as well, Abhijit, because I think, in the past, like, for example, when you actually were sick and you needed a sick day, right? You could say, hey, hey, I'm really sick, I have a cold, whatever. You can see it, you can hear it. You're like, hey, this person is sick, I have the proof. It's evidenced in the way that they're sounding, seeing, looking, whatever. The thing with mental health is because it's invisible, you can't really tell that somebody's unwell, and you can't expect somebody to kind of be, a complete mess to kind of prove, oh yeah, you look like you're sick enough. It's, I think, for good or for bad, the pandemic and all of its ramifications has brought us to a point where it's really having to promote trust in the work environment. And you just have to trust your people. If they say that they need time out, they need time out, and just trust that. Would you say that's true, Nan, of your experience as well?
So I think going back to the question of quitting the job because they're feeling stressed out or they're going through a process of grief, right? Things have definitely changed from the past. I had a scenario where somebody wanted to quit and did not even want to consider a sabbatical of 3 months or 4 months and then think about coming back, right? But if you think from a hiring manager or the reporting manager perspective, they are losing out on a person, whether the person is going out because of grief or anxieties. This person who has been dependent on this individual is going through a loss because the person has decided to quit. Now, who the next person is going to be, or if at all there is another person is coming and doing that work, it is still going to create a void sort of a situation. And this is one of the griefs that nobody talks about, because the reporting manager needs to be tough and motivate the team members irrespective of the tenures. So this is something that organizations need to authentically bring onto the table, tell them that it's okay if people want to leave because they're not feeling up to it. Give them those long sabbaticals if it is required. And if they're really that indispensable, let's open a chat maybe after a few months, see if they're still available. Bring them back with all dignity and respect into their older positions. I think more companies should do these conversations.
That's your excellent suggestion and very promising. But Karishma, I'm going to ask you your experience in the academic space. How realistic is it, and what would you say?
Exactly what I was going to say. It's a little different when it comes to corporate and academia, because in academia, quitting is not very easy, and getting rehired is also not very easy because there is a glut of jobs in any city of your choice. I think what I would suggest to someone who says, take time out, that's for sure, and don't feel you need to convince someone else that you are genuinely needing this time. If you're in academia, quitting is not easy. Getting rehired is not easy, but what you can do is pace it out. And this is something I'm teaching myself as well. You take a long weekend and don't feel you need to convince someone. If you feel I'm not okay, you are not okay. That's validation enough. So pacing it out is the way.
I'm with you. Absolutely. We are at the end of our time, but I'm going to ask the speakers if they're willing to extend for about 15 minutes to deal with the questions that we have. Is that going to be okay with everyone?
Yeah, sure.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. We have another question, and an important one. How does one deal with toxic positivity? This is a good question. This is true. How does one deal with that? Abhijit.
So I think, yeah, so, I think for me, toxic positivity is, when, everybody tells you that just think positive, think positive acts, and then you'll be fine. I mean, I just think that sort of really gets to me. I think that that's insensitive. And it's, in some senses, comes out of lack of understanding of how people work.
Right.
Just one of the things that I want people to sort of really think about is, one of the things I've been writing is there is going to be the rise of emotions in the workplace, and being able to deal with that is both, a skill and a business opportunity. And the future is going to be a lot more about understanding emotions, just as the past has been a lot more about understanding cognitive processes. So we are going to see the rise of relationship workers who will understand how to deal with these kind of settings. And those are skills that you will see progressively. We are at the beginning of the curve, so it will take time. But I think that's where we are headed. So that's how I would sort of respond to it.
That's an insight I really appreciate. It's true. I mean, it's not something that we think about, but that's something positive to look forward to. And yes, I'm going to answer this thing on toxic positivity as well. It's like, you tell a friend, I'm depressed, and they're like, why are you depressed, man? Just be happy. Oh, like it never occurred to me. I should just go be happy, And this is why it's toxic, because it's about giving space and giving time to people who just need to go through their process, right? So Anupriya said, a very important aspect of not being talked about is the privilege that does not exist for the marginalized groups to be able to deal with grief. Points being discussed can definitely cater to the upper middle class who have the environment and space to be able to make these changes, but the marginalized sector does not. Could any of the panelists comment on this? It's a really great question. Anyone? Karishma, take it?
Yeah, so I'm sorry, was Karishma, were you?
No, go ahead, no issue. Go ahead.
No, I just think it's, just as much as, so I think it's up to the employer and it's up to us as human beings, when we look at people around, to be able to sort of really understand that everybody has, the similar, at a human level, everybody has those challenges. So to be able to sort of really sense that when somebody who helps me out at work or at home, is going through grief, to be able to understand that and deal with it in the same sensitivity is what I would say. But yes, I totally agree that for some people it's a luxury. Grieving is a luxury, which has an economic element to it, of course.
Absolutely, Abhijit. I mean, and it's a very It's a great question because let's be frank. I mean, I think the majority of our country lives, in those marginalized sectors, and all of us here on this call, I could safely say, are privileged and are very lucky. But and also to add to what Abhijit was saying, yes, you do not have the privilege. Grieving is a privilege. Let's face it. In most places, what you do, you bury your loved one and you move on. You don't have a choice if you want to eat, work, right? So that's something to keep in mind. And so yes, I would say grieving is a privilege at this point in time. Is there something you wanted to say to weigh in, Karishma, over here?
The only thing is, I know the people we're talking about may not have any kind of institutional or work support or employment support, right? If you're daily wage or if you're on a contract kind of a situation. But then those of us who are privileged and can extend, not being their employers, but just as fellow humans, that is something we can keep in mind at such a time. That's the only thing. And again, our privilege also has limits, right?
Yeah.
It's whatever way we can extend.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's it. I mean, we all have our limits as well when it comes to generosity, empathy, whatever it may be.
What you're saying actually segues into the next question. And this is from Ketan, and I actually know Ketan. And he says, I work in a government setup and there's absolutely no regard given to personal grief or personal experiences. I can say this is true. In the world driven by milestones, deliverables, and timelines, where does the emotional self stand? That's a really vulnerable question. And I thank you so much for asking that. I'd like anyone to kind of to weigh in over here with a question, with a response to Ketan.
I always thought government jobs were easy, and I wanted to be part of a government job. But
you can talk to Karishma; she'll tell you.
Yes.
But
it's a very tough and true situation, actually. It's a tough and true, because the biggest challenge with government jobs is you can't change things as easily as you can in private or corporate. You can't suddenly say we'll do grief education. There is a huge bureaucratic process that you have to follow before you do anything of that sort.
Absolutely. Right? I'm going to ask Ketan I hope he's still here. He is. Ketan, I mean, can we, Ketan, come on into the conversation. If I walk in to my HR, which is non-existent, and say, what is our bereavement policy? I'm going to be laughed out of the room.
Very true.
And this is the reality of it. It's not a complaint. It's saying things as it is. Ketan, you're in the room. Do you want to say something? Do you want to chime in with or add to what you've asked over here? I'm going to give it a second. Okay, so he may not be near his system right now, but yeah, in a government setup, yes, personal grief, personal experiences are way down the ladder of what's important. So, which is why what you were saying, Nan, is so idealistic and fantastic, and I'm so glad that it exists. But we need to see a lot more of that, I think, spread equally across government as well as private sectors.
Yeah.
Which is why, Mahin, I was saying that, the workplace really needs to rethink a number of things. I mean, the pandemic has triggered scenarios which we have never experienced in the workplace, whether it is, when somebody say, I want to take my vacation days, this is just a very new scenario. Where are you going? Nowhere. I'm going to be home, but I'm taking vacation days. These are all situations where workplaces have never had to think about all this. So I think when you're looking at it, that's why I said that think about it as a fresh beginning at work and, to co-create the workplace living in. And many of this, whether it's the government or in the semi-government, blue collar, any of this, none of us have ever faced this situation in the last 100 years. So there is no question of knowing how to respond to it. The second thing I want to say is that, one of the important pieces when we've looked at, filling in leadership roles, I think we've looked at competence in a certain sort of a unilateral, sort of unidimensional way. I think we need to add the emotional maturity, sensitivity, and emotional intelligence as another aspect of leadership, which is as important a criteria, just as much as you wouldn't go to a doctor who doesn't have the medical degree. I also think that we are today expecting that there are situations where a doctor cannot do anything, but they can empathize. I think that's another part of the requirement that I think we need to bring into the workplace.
Yeah, absolutely.
I
No,
think
well said.
the deliverables that we're talking about in a government setup, if there's a bureaucracy or if there's multiple layers of approval, maybe the approver, whoever talks about the deliverables, they need to have an element which talks about empathy or being authentic with their team members, and they need to be coached. Most of the leadership folks are not coached, and somewhere that element needs to come into workplace across the globe, not just the government organizations, but across the workforce.
Absolutely. I think so. This is kind of, I'm glad that we're saying all of this because it's kind of coming down to this point of the need to sensitize and educate and create awareness about, the way to kind of respond to the changing way that we work and the pandemic. So I think there's a call for that, and I think there is a need for that. In a very real way. So we have another comment, and it kind of takes us away from the conversation a little bit, but it's an interesting comment. And it's from Anila, and she says, in traditional communities, bereaved persons were forced to express grief by wailing, chest beating, and by extended family and friends. We've heard of the Rudalis and things like that.
Yes.
Do you think this is relevant today, given that anyone deals differently? So I think what Anila is asking is, while we're not expecting people to kind of beat their chests, does this forced expression have a representation in, I think, today's world in some way? Does it manifest in some way today that could possibly help alleviate?
I see a lot of social media posts these days about people grieving. So I don't know if we can equate the chest beating scenario to a social media post saying that, hey, I lost my mother, or the kind of comments that you see from the people who are supporting you, saying that we're with you, if you need something, reach us out. So that divide has gone and people are closer. But again, that's become very virtual, that's become very artificial in terms of expressing grief or expressing support. I mean, people can have a different take, but I feel that the bereavement or the grief timelines have reduced, and it has become very artificial these days. We're not allowing people to grieve because you're saying, like, the toxic positivity, you're saying you're going to be all right, it's okay, just take your time, come back, immerse yourself into work. So I think the divide has come shorter, and we're not giving people enough time to spend with themselves and grieve enough. That's my take on this.
Yeah, we have. Okay, so we're going to be wrapping this up properly this time. We're going to take one last question. Sometimes it's by de priode, and they have asked, sometimes in the workplace, there are colleagues who actually would try to push some work onto you because you may be new to the place and you are diligent and delivering, while those colleagues enjoy themselves. It's quite usual in academia. We're going to check with Karishma if that's true. And more importantly, you can't seek help because it's your teammates who are making the environment toxic. So what do our panelists have to say about that? God, it sounds like a messy situation though. Sorry if you're going through this, Deepu. That's pretty rubbish. Karishma. Oh my God, Karishma's frozen, which means I think her connection is dropped. Oh, that's a little
Yeah, it is true sometimes.
Yes. I mean, I think in academia, like Karishma really would be the best person to respond to this.
Yeah.
But I work in academia, but not directly. And if you say this is happening, then I'm going to take your word for it that it's happening. How do you make the environment toxic? I think that I would say that it's a great opportunity to have a conversation and say, listen, this is, again, it's about boundaries, right? This is what's okay with me, and this is what's not okay with me. Nadia, do you want to say something about that?
Mine is a tough one, but I'll take it. The person who's asked this sounds like a younger person, age-wise, and also junior at work. And if it's academia, then if it's a government job again, and a private sector also, both areas, for a younger person who's just starting to work, they'll tend to take the load of work so as to, it's a cyclic thing. You want to prove, you want to stay, don't want to lose your job, so on and so forth. So it's a tough take for this person. If it's not, I can't answer this as in a general expanse, but in particular for this young man, I think it's got a lot to do with what you said, boundaries. If he's aware of being bullied, if he feels that he's being bullied, perhaps just setting very loose boundaries might help him, because this is it's a very particular question. It's not a general one. And again, the fear of taking this to your seniors can, a lot of loopholes are there. So, and academia is a very tricky place. So just setting very loose boundaries and saying, could I take this work home? Could I take a few, take an extra 24 hours on this one? Just generally moving around it and seeing how he can set his boundaries. And here's Karishma. I think she would be
the last question, Karishma, and you are going to wrap up for us. Did you get the question?
A toxic academia? I think it was regarding toxic academia.
I think, yes, it was about a toxic, yeah.
Yeah, about, so it takes some time to figure it out. Don't be too hard on yourself. I've been there till you realize that people are dumping work on you and that you're actually experiencing a toxic environment. Once you do, obviously you can't quit that easily, but you can certainly safeguard yourself by keeping a distance and setting boundaries. It might be, having to restart all over again because you trusted these people in the first place, but you can get there by starting to set boundaries the day you realize that you're experiencing toxicity.
But is it always like that, Karishma? Like, can't you have a mental model saying that, okay, this person is not dumping a lot of work on me, but maybe I should have a learning mindset and probably have a conversation.
What he's trying to say is initially he started like that and it reached a place where he realized this is taking advantage of him. I think that's what he was trying to say. And we all do start with genuine intention, saying somebody wants me to learn, grow, till we realize that there's some other motive.
Yeah.
And also coming from academia, I can speak that it's pretty common.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. But it can be done.
We absolutely have to stop now.
Right.
Mahini, is it okay if I take a screenshot of this? I think we spoke a lot of good things and I'd like to propagate this on social media, tagging all of you.
Yes.
Alrighty, thank you. Done.
Thank you.
Cool.
I just want to say thank you to all the attendees who stayed to the very end of this session. Really, really thank you for your patience and for your participation and for asking these really interesting questions that I personally didn't even think about, but you've really opened my mind. There's a lot to think about. I think a lot to do. I really want to thank Abhijit, who really, I have to stop saying really. I want to thank Abhijit, who was the inspiration for this session. His article gave me a lot of food for thought. And a lot of stuff that you've said today, Abhijit, I'm going to go away with, because something you said about how the future is going to be creating a whole different kind of person is something that I'm going to take away and I'm going to hold on to, because that's really positive. Thank you so much, Nan, for your time, for your experience, for your expertise. Thank you, and I hope that we have more opportunities to interact.
My pleasure.
I am hoping to see you on many more of these because your inputs are invaluable and we love having you with us on our Sundowners. And Nadia, I'm never letting you go. You're going to be on all my Sundowners forever and ever and ever. So thanks very much, everyone. And Pavitra, for joining us, thank you so very much. And we will be hosting another Sundowner very soon. The details will be out. Please follow us and watch our space and find out what's happening next. The next topic is going to be very interesting, I think, especially to you who are in academia. So please keep your eyes and ears to the ground. Thanks very much. Have a great evening and a fantastic weekend. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.